There is a question as ancient as time, one that resonates in the deepest chambers of our hearts. Why do we live? What is the foundation of all that we are? It's a question that humankind has wrestled with for centuries, carving monuments to our beliefs, composing symphonies to express the ineffable, and filling libraries with philosophies seeking an answer. Yet, despite all our efforts, it often feels as though the answer slips through our fingers, just out of reach. Why is that? Why does the search for meaning leave so many feeling hollow? Some people chase wealth, believing that the accumulation of material possessions will fill the void. Others pursue power, convinced that the ability to control others will grant them the significance they crave. Many strive for recognition, longing to be seen and celebrated, hoping that applause will drown out the gnawing sense of inadequacy within. But here's a truth that most dare not face: none of these pursuits will matter if they're not built upon the right foundation. Imagine for a moment constructing the most magnificent building, a marvel of engineering and art, a structure that towers above the skyline, admired by all who see it. Now imagine discovering, too late, that the ground beneath it was unstable, that the foundation was weak. The collapse is inevitable, no matter how stunning the structure once appeared. This is the story of our lives when we prioritize the temporary over the eternal, the superficial over the substantial. What if I told you that the chaos in your life, the uncertainties, the disappointments, the endless striving stems from a single misplaced priority? What if the sleepless nights, the constant feeling of inadequacy, the fear of failure, and the relentless need to prove yourself could all be traced back to one decision, what whom you have placed at the center of your life? What if the answer has been within your reach all along, but you've ignored it, distracted by the noise of the world and the siren call of its promises? Would you be willing to pause, to reflect, to consider that perhaps you've been building on sand when solid ground has been waiting for you all along? Stick with me, because today we uncover a truth that has the power to transform your life from the inside out. It's not complicated, but it's uncompromising. It's a truth that will challenge you, but also set you free. The foundation you choose will determine not only the direction of your days, but the destiny of your soul. And the choice is this: God first or nothing. There is no middle ground, no comfortable compromise. Either He is at the center of your life, guiding every decision and anchoring your purpose, or you are adrift, chasing illusions that will fade with time. Let's dig deeper together into what it means to build your life on the only foundation that will never crumble. Because once you truly understand, you'll never want to go back to the unstable ground you once stood on. Purpose is the engine of human existence. Every single action we take, every thought we ponder, and every decision we make is driven by a deep, sometimes subconscious, desire for purpose. Without purpose, life feels aimless, like a ship lost at sea with no destination in sight. It's why we wake up in the morning and push ourselves through challenges. It's what gives our struggles meaning. Yet so many of us pursue purpose in the wrong places, expecting fulfillment from things that were never meant to sustain us. The modern world bombards us with ideas about what purpose should look like. For some, it's tied to career success, climbing the corporate ladder, earning promotions, and achieving financial milestones. For others, it's about relationships, investing everything into being the perfect parent, spouse, or friend. These goals, while noble, often fail to deliver the sense of completeness we crave. Why? Because purpose derived from temporary achievements is fleeting. What happens when the job ends, the relationship falters, or the applause stops? True purpose cannot be manufactured or found in things that perish. Purpose must be rooted in something eternal. When we chase after worldly definitions of purpose, we find ourselves running on a treadmill, exerting tremendous effort but going nowhere. It's exhausting and unsustainable. We were not created to find purpose in the finite. Our souls long for the infinite. This longing, though we may not always recognize it, is a call to God. God is the author of purpose. He created each of us with intention, crafting our personalities, talents, and circumstances for a specific reason. When we put Him first, we discover a purpose that transcends the temporary, a calling that anchors us even in the most turbulent seasons of life. Instead of seeking validation from others, we begin to see our worth through His eyes. Instead of striving for temporary success, we focus on fulfilling His eternal plan. Putting God first does not diminish our personal ambitions, it gives them clarity and direction. It's like a compass that aligns us with true north, guiding our efforts toward what truly matters. Suddenly our work, relationships, and goals take on deeper significance because they're part of a larger story, God's story. And in this story, every detail, no matter how small, has meaning. When we ignore God, the search for purpose becomes a heavy burden. We wander from one pursuit to the next, hoping the next job, the next achievement, or the next relationship will fill the void. But the void cannot be filled by anything less than the One who created us. It's like trying to power a car with water. Instead of fuel, it simply won't work. God designed us to find our purpose in Him, and anything else will ultimately leave us empty. To seek purpose without seeking God is to miss the very reason for our existence. It's like staring at a masterpiece without understanding the artist's vision, or reading a book without knowing the ending. We were created by God and for God, and only in Him do we find the purpose we so desperately crave. When God is first, purpose is no longer something we chase, it's something we live. Security is one of the most basic human needs. From the time we are born, we seek safety first in the arms of our parents, then in the structures and routines of life. As adults, this need doesn't go away, it simply takes on different forms. We work tirelessly to create stability, whether through financial savings, strong relationships, or good health. Yet no matter how much effort we pour into building a secure life, something always feels fragile. Why is that? The truth is, the world is an inherently insecure place. Economies crash, relationships break, and health fails. Despite our best efforts, we cannot guarantee security because so much lies beyond our control. This reality leaves many of us feeling anxious, constantly on edge, as we try to hold everything together. But is it even possible to find true security in a world that offers none? The answer is yes, but only when we put God first. God is the only unchanging source of security in an unpredictable world. He is eternal, unshakable, and sovereign over all things. When we anchor our lives in Him, we discover a peace that transcends circumstances. No matter what happens around us, financial hardship, personal loss, or global turmoil, our foundation remains firm because it is rooted in God's promises. This doesn't mean that putting God first will shield us from challenges. Difficulties will still come, but they will no longer define us. Instead of being tossed around by the waves of life, we stand firm, knowing that God is in control. This kind of security allows us to face uncertainty with courage, trusting that God's plan is good, even when we don't understand it in the moment. When we rely on worldly things for security, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Money can disappear overnight, relationship falter, and physical health is never guaranteed. But God's faithfulness never wavers. He promises to provide for our needs, guide us through trials, and never leave us nor forsake us. These promises are not based on our performance, but on His unchanging character. Putting God first transforms how we view security. Instead of striving to control every detail of our lives, we learn to trust God with the unknown. We stop clinging to things that cannot sustain us and start resting in the assurance that He holds our future. This shift brings freedom from anxiety, freedom from fear, and freedom to live boldly for His glory. True security is not about eliminating risk or avoiding hardship. It's about knowing that no matter what happens, God is with us. When we trust Him above all else, we experience a deep sense of peace that the world cannot offer. This peace doesn't come from having all the answers, but from knowing the One who does. And that makes all the difference. From the time we are children, we long to be seen and acknowledged. Whether it's a parent's praise, a teacher's approval, or a friend's affirmation, recognition feels like proof that we matter. As we grow older, this desire doesn't fade, it often intensifies. We seek validation through our work, our relationships, and our achievements, hoping that others will affirm our worth. But what happens when the applause stops? What happens when no one is watching? The problem with seeking recognition from others is that it's never enough. No matter how much praise we receive, we always want more. It's like drinking salt water to quench our thirst, it only leaves us thirstier. This endless pursuit of validation can become an exhausting cycle, leading us to base our sense of self-worth on external opinions. But what if our worth doesn't depend on what others think of us? God offers us a different kind of recognition, one that isn't tied to performance or achievement. When we put God first, we discover that our worth comes from being His creation, loved and chosen by Him. This recognition is not fleeting, it's eternal. God sees us not for what we do, but for who we are in Him, and that changes everything. Instead of striving for the approval of others, we begin to seek God's approval. This doesn't mean we stop caring about people, it means we stop being controlled by their opinions. When we know that we are loved and valued by God, we are free to live authentically, without fear of judgment or rejection. His validation is enough. Seeking recognition from God rather than the world also changes how we approach our work and relationships. Instead of trying to impress others, we focus on honoring Him in everything we do. This shift brings a sense of purpose and fulfillment that worldly recognition cannot match. We no longer need to prove our worth because we know it is already secure in Him. The desire for recognition isn't inherently wrong, it's part of being human. But when we place it above our relationship with God, it becomes an idol. Only when we put God first do we find the recognition our souls truly long for. He sees us, knows us, and loves us completely, and that is enough. At the heart of so much of our striving is a primal fear, the fear of being forgotten. We yearn for our lives to matter, for our presence to leave an indelible mark on the world. This fear manifests in our desire to create legacies, to build monuments to our existence, whether through fame, accomplishments, or even the memories we leave with others. But what if, despite all our efforts, the world moves on, and our names fade into obscurity? What if the very thing we fear most is inevitable? History is filled with examples of people who dedicated their lives to being remembered. They amassed wealth, conquered nations, or created masterpieces, all in the hope that their names would echo through the ages. And yet, for most, time has erased their legacy. The vast majority of humanity is forgotten, buried beneath the weight of history. The reality is that even the greatest earthly legacies are temporary. Monuments crumble, stories are rewritten, and memories fade. But what if the fear of being forgotten is not a curse but a clue? What if it points us toward a deeper truth, that our significance was never meant to be tied to earthly recognition? God has written eternity into our hearts, and the longing to be remembered is a reflection of our desire for eternal significance. This desire can only be fulfilled when we place our identity in Him. When we put God first, we realize that we are not forgotten. The Creator of the universe knows us by name and remembers every detail of our lives. Even the smallest acts of faith and love are recorded in His eternal memory. Unlike the fleeting recognition of the world, God's acknowledgement is permanent and unchanging. To be known and remembered by Him is to possess a significance that cannot be erased. God's remembrance transforms how we view our lives. Instead of striving to leave a mark on the world, we begin to focus on leaving a mark in eternity. This shift doesn't diminish our ambitions, it elevates them. Our actions, relationships, and contributions take on eternal value because they are aligned with God's purposes. We are no longer building sandcastles that will wash away, but investing in a kingdom that will never fade. Fear of being forgotten can paralyze us, leading us to chase after things that ultimately don't matter. But when we put God first, this fear is replaced by a profound assurance. We are known, loved, and remembered by the One who holds eternity in His hands. And in His kingdom, nothing done in His name is ever wasted or forgotten. So the question is not whether we will be remembered, but who will remember us. When we seek earthly recognition, we gamble with time. But when we seek God's acknowledgement, we secure a legacy that lasts forever. One of the deepest longings of the human heart is to be loved fully, completely, and without condition. From our earliest moments, we seek love from those around us, whether it's the embrace of a parent, the friendship of a peer, or the affection of a partner. Yet even in our closest relationships, love often feels conditional. It's given and taken based on our actions, achievements, or perceived worth. This conditionality leaves us yearning for something more. The world teaches us that love must be earned. We are told that we must look a certain way, achieve certain things, or behave in a specific manner to be worthy of love. This belief drives much of our behavior, pushing us to perform, conform, and strive. But no matter how hard we try, the love we receive often feels incomplete. Why? Because human love, while beautiful, is flawed. It reflects the limitations of a broken world. God's love, however, is radically different. It is unconditional, unchanging, and not dependent on our performance. When we put God first, we experience a love that is not based on who we are, but on who He is. This love is not earned. It is freely given. It is a gift that cannot be bought or lost. And it is this love that fulfills the deepest longings of our hearts. God's unconditional love transforms how we see ourselves. Instead of defining our worth based on others' opinions, we begin to see ourselves through His eyes. We realize that we are cherished, not because of what we do, but because of who we are, His creation, made in His image. This realization brings freedom, lifting the burden of constantly trying to prove ourselves. This love also transforms how we relate to others. When we understand the depth of God's love for us, we are able to extend that same love to those around us. We no longer seek to earn or manipulate love because we are already secure in God's affection. This security allows us to give love freely, without expecting anything in return. The pursuit of unconditional love drives much of our behavior, often leading us down paths that disappoint us. But when we put God first, we discover a love that meets every need and exceeds every expectation. It is a love that never fails, a love that remains constant even in our darkest moments. God's love is not just an idea, it is an experience. It is the embrace that comforts us, the assurance that steadies us, and the hope that sustains us. When we make Him our priority, we step into a relationship where we are fully known and fully loved, a relationship that changes everything. Control is an illusion that we cling to with all our might. We plan, strategize, and organize every aspect of our lives in an attempt to maintain a sense of order. From our careers to our relationships, from our health to our finances, we believe that if we just try hard enough, we can control the outcomes. But life has a way of reminding us that control is fleeting. A single unexpected event can upend everything, leaving us feeling helpless and vulnerable. This relentless striving for control often leads to anxiety. We worry about the future, replay past mistakes, and obsess over scenarios we can't change. The more we try to control, the more we realize how little control we actually have. It's a cycle that drains our energy and robs us of peace. When we put God first, we find a different way of living, one that doesn't rely on our ability to control, but on His sovereignty. God is in control of all things, and His plans are perfect. This doesn't mean life will always go the way we want, but it does mean that nothing happens outside of His will. Trusting in His control frees us from the need to micromanage every detail of our lives. Letting go of control is not easy. It requires faith, a deep trust that God knows what's best for us, even when we don't understand His ways. But this faith brings a peace that surpasses all understanding. It allows us to face uncertainty with confidence, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. When we put God first, we learn to surrender. Surrender is not about giving up, it's about giving over, handing our worries, plans, and fears to the one who can handle them far better than we can. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. It acknowledges that God's ways are higher than our ways and His thoughts higher than our thoughts. Surrendering control doesn't mean we stop planning or working hard. It means we do so with a heart of trust rather than fear. We make our plans, but we leave the outcomes to God. This perspective transforms how we approach life. Instead of being paralyzed by what we can't control, we focus on what we can: our faith, our attitude, and our obedience. In a world that values self-reliance, surrendering control to God may seem counterintuitive, but it is the key to true freedom. When we put Him first, we release the burden of trying to hold everything together. We find rest in His sovereignty, peace in His promises, and joy in His presence. And in that place of trust, we discover a life far greater than anything we could have controlled on our own. Fear of loss is a powerful motivator, shaping much of what we do and how we live. We cling to what we have, whether it's relationships, possessions, or opportunities, because the thought of losing them fills us with anxiety. This fear often drives us to overwork, overprotect, and overextend ourselves, leaving us mentally and emotionally drained. But what if the fear of loss is less about what we're holding on to and more about what we're trusting? At its core, the fear of loss stems from our attachment to things that we believe define us or give us security. We think, if I lose this job, who am I? If I lose this relationship, what will I do? If I lose my health, what's left of me? These thoughts reveal where we have placed our identity and hope. When those things are taken away or even threatened, our sense of self crumbles, exposing the fragility of a life built on temporary things. But what if we placed our trust in something or someone who cannot be lost? When we put God first, the fear of loss diminishes. Why? Because God is unchanging and eternal. He is the one thing in life we cannot lose. No matter what happens, His love, presence, and promises remain steadfast. This assurance shifts our focus from clinging to what we have to trusting in who He is. When God is first, we begin to see everything we have as a gift, not a guarantee. Our relationships, possessions, and opportunities are blessings from Him, but they are not our ultimate source of joy or identity. This perspective frees us from the suffocating grip of fear. Instead of living in constant anxiety about what we might lose, we live in gratitude for what we've been given. God also promises that whatever we lose in this life, He can restore in ways far greater than we can imagine. This doesn't always mean material restoration. Sometimes it's spiritual or emotional. He replaces loss with His peace, His presence, and His purpose. In His hands, even loss becomes a tool for growth and transformation. Fear of loss often leads us to hold on to things too tightly, but putting God first teaches us the art of release. When we trust Him, we can let go of the need to control outcomes, knowing that He is working all things together for our good. This doesn't mean we won't experience pain or grief, but it does mean that loss won't define us. God's promises give us a hope that transcends circumstances. Fear of loss is rooted in the belief that we are alone in this world, that we must fight to hold on to what we have. But when we put God first, we realize we are never alone. He is with us in every moment, guiding us, providing for us, and comforting us. And in His presence, fear has no place. The desire for justice is woven into the fabric of humanity. From an early age, we instinctively cry out when something feels unfair. As we grow older, this desire doesn't fade, it intensifies. We long to see wrongs made right, for good to triumph over evil, and for fairness to prevail. But in a world filled with corruption, inequality, and suffering, justice often feels elusive. This can leave us frustrated, disillusioned, and even bitter. Much of our striving is driven by this yearning for justice. We work hard to prove ourselves, fight against perceived injustices, and seek fairness in our personal and professional lives. While these efforts are admirable, they often fall short because human justice is inherently flawed. Our judgments are clouded by bias, and our systems are limited by imperfection. No matter how noble our intentions, we cannot achieve perfect justice on our own. When we put God first, we discover a justice that is higher and purer than anything we can imagine. God is the ultimate judge, and His justice is perfect. He sees what we cannot see, knows what we cannot know, and acts in ways that transcend our understanding. Trusting in His justice allows us to let go of the need to fix everything ourselves. It gives us peace, knowing that He will make all things right in His time. This trust doesn't mean we become passive in the face of injustice. On the contrary, putting God first inspires us to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with Him. It gives us the strength to stand against wrongs, not out of anger or vengeance, but out of a desire to reflect His righteousness. We become agents of His justice, not by our power, but by His guidance. The yearning for justice is ultimately a yearning for God. He is the source of all that is good and fair. When we seek Him, we find the assurance that no wrong goes unnoticed, no pain is wasted, and no act of evil will go unaddressed. This assurance frees us from the burden of carrying the world's injustices on our shoulders. It reminds us that the final word belongs to Him. God's justice also teaches us to forgive. When we trust Him to handle wrongs, we no longer feel the need to take revenge or harbor bitterness. We can release our anger and rest in His promise that vengeance is His. Forgiveness becomes possible because we know that God's justice will prevail, even if we don't see it in this life. The world's injustice can feel overwhelming, but putting God first gives us a perspective of hope. It reminds us that this life is not the end of the story. God's kingdom is coming, and in that kingdom, every wrong will be made right, every tear will be wiped away, and perfect justice will reign forever. Deep down, every human being longs for change, for transformation that goes beyond the surface and reaches the very core of who we are. We want to break free from bad habits, overcome insecurities, and become the best version of ourselves. This longing fuels countless self-help books, motivational talks, and personal development programs. Yet despite all our efforts, real and lasting transformation often feels out of reach. Why? The problem lies in where we place our hope for change. We often rely on our own strength, thinking that sheer willpower or discipline is enough to reshape our lives. While these tools can bring temporary results, they rarely address the deeper issues within us. True transformation requires more than behavior modification, it requires heart transformation. And that is something only God can do. When we put God first, we invite Him to transform us from the inside out. This transformation is not about following rules or striving for perfection. It's about allowing His Spirit to work within us. God doesn't just want to change our actions. He wants to renew our minds, heal our hearts, and restore our souls. His transformation is holistic, touching every part of our being. God's transformation is also enduring. Unlike self-made changes that fade over time, the work He does in us is eternal. He gives us a new identity, rooted in His love and purpose, and empowers us to live in alignment with His will. This kind of transformation doesn't rely on our strength, but on His power, which is limitless. Transformation through God isn't instantaneous, it's a process. It requires surrender, faith, and patience. But as we put Him first, we begin to see the fruits of His work in our lives: peace where there was once anxiety, joy where there was sorrow, and strength where there was weakness. These changes are not superficial, they are evidence of His presence within us. When God transforms us, He also equips us to transform the world around us. As we become more like Him, our actions, words, and attitudes reflect His love and truth. We become instruments of His grace, bringing hope and healing to others. This ripple effect of transformation is one of the most powerful ways we can impact the world. Our longing for transformation is a longing for God. We were created in His image, and the desire to change reflects our yearning to return to the wholeness He intended for us. When we put Him first, we step into the process of becoming who we were always meant to be, a process that is both beautiful and eternal. There is a longing deep within every human heart, a longing that no earthly success, relationship, or possession can satisfy. It's a quiet but persistent yearning, one that whispers to us in moments of stillness and grows louder in times of struggle. It is the search for eternity, the desire to connect with something greater, something lasting, something infinite. Yet in a world consumed by the temporary, many of us struggle to recognize this longing for what it truly is. This search for eternity often disguises itself as the pursuit of happiness or fulfillment. We chase achievements, accumulate wealth, and cultivate relationships, hoping these things will fill the void within us. And for a time they may seem to. But eventually, the satisfaction fades, and we're left with the same question we started with: is this all there is? The answer, of course, is no. Our souls were not made for the finite, they were made for the infinite. The Bible tells us that God has set eternity in the human heart. Ecclesiastes 3:11. This means that the longing we feel is not an accident or a flaw, it is a divine imprint, a reminder of our true purpose and destiny. We were created to be in relationship with an eternal God, and nothing else can satisfy that desire. When we put God first, we align ourselves with this truth, and the search for eternity begins to make sense. Putting God first doesn't remove our longing for eternity, it fulfills it. When we prioritize our relationship with Him, we experience a connection that transcends time and space. His presence fills the void that nothing else could, and we begin to understand that our lives are part of a much larger story. This eternal perspective transforms how we view everything: our work, our relationships, and even our challenges. They all take on new meaning when seen in the light of eternity. This search for eternity also explains why so many of us fear death. The finality of death feels unnatural because it is. We were not created for death, we were created for eternal life. And while our physical bodies are temporary, our souls are not. When we put God first, we gain the assurance of eternal life with Him. This doesn't just bring comfort, it brings hope. It reminds us that death is not the end, but a transition into something far greater. Living with an eternal perspective changes how we approach the present. We stop wasting time on things that don't matter and start investing in what does: our relationship with God, our love for others, and our obedience to His will. This doesn't mean we abandon our earthly responsibilities, it means we approach them with a greater purpose. Everything we do becomes an act of worship, a way of preparing for the eternity we were created for. The search for eternity also brings freedom. When we put God first, we are no longer enslaved to the temporary. We don't have to chase after fleeting pleasures or prove our worth through worldly accomplishments. Instead, we rest in the knowledge that our value comes from being loved by an eternal God. This freedom allows us to live boldly, knowing that our lives have eternal significance. Finally, the search for eternity reveals our need for God's guidance. Navigating life without an eternal perspective is like trying to read a map without knowing the destination. When we put God first, He becomes our guide, leading us toward the eternal purpose for which we were created. His word becomes our compass, His Spirit our strength, and His promises our hope. In the end, the search for eternity is not about finding something, it's about finding someone. And when we find Him, when we put God first, we realize that our search is over. We have found what our hearts were longing for all along, a relationship with the eternal Creator who loves us beyond measure and invites us to spend eternity with Him. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth stands above all else. Putting God first is not just a choice, it is the only choice that leads to a life of true meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. The world offers countless alternatives, promising success, happiness, and recognition, but these are fleeting at best. They leave us yearning for something more, something lasting. That something is not a thing but a relationship with the eternal God who created us, loves us, and desires to walk with us every step of the way. Think about it, every pursuit, every action, every longing you've ever felt has been pointing you toward this moment of realization. Whether it's the search for purpose, the craving for security, or the fear of being forgotten, all these desires find their ultimate fulfillment in God. He is the source of all we seek, the answer to the questions we've been asking, and the foundation upon which we must build our lives. Putting God first doesn't mean life will suddenly become easy. Challenges will still come, losses will still occur, and questions will still arise. But the difference is this: with God as your foundation, you will no longer face these trials alone or without hope. His strength becomes your strength, His wisdom your guide, and His love your comfort. He steadies you when the storms of life rage, reminding you that your purpose and worth are anchored in Him, not in the shifting sands of this world. To put God first is to live with an eternal perspective. It means prioritizing what truly matters and letting go of what doesn't. It's about trusting His plan even when you don't understand it. Surrendering control to the One who holds all things in His hands, and allowing His Spirit to transform you from the inside out. It's not just a way to live, it's the only way to truly live. As we close, ask yourself this: what have I been putting first in my life? Is it your career, relationships, possessions, or perhaps your own fears and insecurities? Whatever it is, if it's not God, it will eventually fail you. But the good news is this: it's never too late to change. God is waiting with open arms, ready to take His rightful place in your life, not as an afterthought or a backup plan, but as your foundation, your compass, your everything. The choice is yours, but the stakes couldn't be higher. To live without God is to build a life that will ultimately crumble. But to put Him first is to step into a life of abundance, peace, and purpose both now and for eternity. This isn't just about living well, it's about living with meaning, living with hope, and living in alignment with the One who created you. So today, make the decision that will change everything. Choose God first or nothing, because in the end there is no middle ground. The foundation you choose will determine not only how you live, but how you leave this world and where you spend eternity. And when you put God first, you'll discover that He is not just enough, He is everything.